Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to uncover what's essentially a hidden biological thriller happening right inside the human mind. We're looking at a phenomenon that is so deeply embedded in our biology, it actually dictates how our brains are wired, how our cells age, and how we perceive the entire world around us. And honestly, the most fascinating part? It's completely invisible.
So, what if I told you your brain's most vital survival alarm might actually be slowly destroying your body? I know, it sounds a bit crazy, but let's dive into this mysterious condition. Imagine a rogue biological agent that actively shrinks your brain volume, triggers systemic inflammation across your whole body, and creates phantom threats entirely out of thin air. You'd probably think we were talking about some new supervirus or a rare genetic disease, right? But the real culprit behind these massive neurobiological shifts is simply the subjective feeling of being lonely.
Section 1. The invisible warning signal, a primal survival mechanism.
To really wrap our heads around how this happens, we actually need to completely reframe how we think about loneliness. We usually think of it as just a passive sadness or maybe even a personal failing, but evolutionary biology tells a totally different story. We are, at our core, fundamentally social animals. Think about it. Just as you are genetically programmed to feel physical pain when you touch a hot stove, which is a signal to protect your physical tissue, you're actually programmed to feel social pain when you're isolated. Loneliness isn't a weakness, it's a distress call exactly like hunger, thirst, or physical agony. It's designed to protect your social body.
The late John Cacioppo, who completely pioneered this field, hit the nail on the head. He explained that this evolutionary alarm prompts us to repair frayed connections. If we go back and think about our ancestors, separation from the collaborative group meant you had no one to help forage, absolutely no one to watch your back against predators, and, well, zero chance of reproductive success. To an early human, isolation literally meant certain death. So your brain evolved this agonizing alarm system to force you back into the safety of the tribe.
Which brings us to Section 2. Inside the lonely brain, rewiring for survival. So, what's actually happening under the hood when a brain feels isolated? It doesn't just sit there feeling sad. It actively begins rewiring its neural pathways to prepare for a hostile, solitary environment. Loneliness is a physical, structural brain event. Look at the amygdala, for instance. That's our fear center. It actually becomes hyperactive to social threats, but physically shrinks in overall volume. Then you've got the prefrontal cortex, which also loses volume, impairing our cognitive control. The ventral striatum, the part that processes reward, starts showing a blunted response when looking at strangers. That means social encounters literally start to feel less rewarding, and changes in the insula disrupt how we perceive emotions, both in ourselves and in other people. It's a massive shift.
But it doesn't stop with just structural changes. The brain's functional networks basically shift into overdrive. The isolated brain locks into an intense state of self-preservation. It ramps up activity in the default network, which traps you in this endless loop of rumination. And through the salience network, it becomes incredibly hypervigilant to the outside world. In fact, studies using eye tracking and EEGs show that lonely brains are demonstrably faster at identifying negative emotional expressions, like anger or fear, on the faces of others. Your brain is obsessively scanning for threats because it truly believes you are completely unprotected.
Section 3. The hypervigilance trap, the paradox of connection.
Now, this neural rewiring creates a really terrifying psychological paradox. It's honestly the core tragedy of the condition. The lonely brain desperately craves connection to silence the alarm, right? But because its threat detection systems are dialed all the way up to max, it becomes absolutely terrified of the very social connection it needs to survive. Here's how the vicious cycle plays out. Step 1. You perceive that you're isolated. Step 2. That evolutionary alarm triggers hypervigilance. Step 3. Because you're on such high alert, you start misinterpreting ambiguous social cues. A friend just being busy is suddenly seen as a targeted, intentional rejection, which naturally leads to step 4. You act with hostility, or you just withdraw completely, which pushes people even further away, landing you right back at step 1. Your very own survival alarm is breeding paranoia.
Scientists call this an evolutionary mismatch. And, well, that makes perfect sense. This hyper-alertness was absolutely fantastic if you were wandering alone out on the savannah. It kept you from being eaten by a lion while you scurried back to your tribe. But in the modern world of isolated cities, digital screens, and solo apartment living, there's no physical predator to fight or flee from. But your brain doesn't know that. It's reacting to a missed text message the exact same way it reacted to a saber-toothed tiger, trapping us in this endless, exhausting psychological loop of misery.
Section 4. The toll on the body, when the alarm won't turn off.
So when you can't deactivate this rogue alarm system, this psychological thriller spills over and becomes a total physiological wrecking ball. The brain's distress signal just starts systematically breaking down the physical body. To really grasp the scale of this, we have to look at the numbers. An astonishing 25 to 50% of the US population is impacted by loneliness at any given time. We are talking about millions of people walking around with a biological alarm just ringing in their ears, constantly flooding their bodies with an unending toxic stream of stress hormone.
Why does it do this? Well, the social safety theory basically explains that the brain is tricking the body into preparing for an actual physical injury, because historically, an isolated animal is way more likely to be attacked. So, in response, your body elevates cortisol, spikes your blood pressure, and floods your entire system with inflammation. Over time, this immense wear and tear dramatically increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, accelerates cognitive decline and Alzheimer's, and, this is wild, it pushes your overall mortality risk to levels comparable to smoking cigarettes. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, breaking the vicious cycle, silencing the rogue alarm.
Okay, take a breath, because there is a very hopeful twist in our narrative today. We are not just helpless victims of our evolutionary biology. The profound structural and chemical damage caused by this rogue alarm system, it's not necessarily a permanent life sentence. In laboratory settings, animal models like rodents and non-human primates show us that the impacts of social isolation on the brain are actually reversible. Actively returning an isolated animal to a social group can normalize gene expression, reverse the cellular restructuring in the hippocampus, and literally rebuild those frayed neural pathways in the prefrontal cortex. The brain really can heal. But, and this is a huge but, for humans, it requires a highly specific approach. You can't just throw a lonely person into a crowded party or force them to interact. That's highly ineffective. Remember, their brain is currently perceiving strangers as literal threats. Meta-analyses of human interventions show that the absolute most effective treatments are the ones that target maladaptive social cognitions. Basically, you have to actively rewire how the brain perceives social threats. You have to teach the brain that the environment is safe again, turning off the alarm from the inside out before any true meaningful connection can even happen.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. I want you to rethink social withdrawal. The next time you see it in yourself, or maybe in someone you care about, please don't view it as a personal failure or some sort of antisocial attitude. Recognize it for what the science absolutely shows it to be, a misfiring, ancient biological survival alarm. Silencing it doesn't happen overnight. It requires immense patience, understanding, and intentional cognitive rewiring to let the brain know that, finally, it is safe to come back to the tribe.